Greetings from my backyard in Southern California. I was just going to go over some things that were on my mind. Kind of a pickup from where I left when I was talking about America and the foundations of our nation and how it wasn't 1619, but rather our nation's roots go way beyond that. Actually, it was birthed kind of from Europe, from the Puritan movement. Puritanism actually started in England in late mid-1500s, and what they thought they were going to try to do was reform the Church of England, because the Church of England was basically a Catholic church in England, the same form of worship, where they thought that the leader of the church in Roman Catholicism was the Pope, but in England it was the king. And so the Puritans wanted to do away with that and basically form their way of worship out of the Word of God and get rid of everything else that had nothing to do with truth. And so they were looked down upon by the monarchy and many of the established people from the Church of England. And so at the time this was happening, Henry VIII was king, and so he had no interest in religious matters. Matter of fact, he broke off the Catholic Church because he had his marriage annulled, and so that was looked down upon in the Roman Catholic Church. And so, like I said, he had no interest in spiritual things. He just wanted to do what he wanted to do, and so they broke off. And so, one thing led to another, and so there's this filth of religion that's permeating much of Europe at the time through the Roman Catholic Church and through the Church of England and other churches. They weren't really practicing truth. It was a form of religion without God. And so Puritanism rose about 1560 or so, and it was established under the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, and so they basically had to go start these little secret meeting places, underground churches, and because they were publicly ostracized, and so a lot of contempt was placed on them for their stands for truth and stands against the king and the Church of England. And so their goal was basically to have Jesus Christ as the head of the church and not the king. And so you fast forward some years, another king came into power by the name of James VI, and he was after Elizabeth when she died in 1603 or so. And so he's famous for the authorized version of the Bible. I have no issues with the King James Bible. It's a very solid word-for-word transcript. And so, but the reason James authorized its publication is because he had issues with the Bible that the Puritans were using, and they were using what they call the Geneva Bible. And it wasn't so much the Geneva Bible that he was opposed to, it was little notes that Geneva Bible had. And so there was notes in there that disturbed him and the king, because King James was basically he wanted to do what he wanted to do, and he liked the authority of the king and being the head of the church. And so in the Geneva translation, they had those little notes in the margins for the readers of it, like in Acts chapter 5, where it says we ought to obey God rather than man. And so in the notes there, they put we are servants of the Most High God, not the most current reigning king. And so that bothered the monarchy, and so understandably, he put into mass production the King James Bible to basically kind of overwhelm the readers of the Bible with simple truth, which is, in a way, it worked out for the glory of God either way. But those little notes in there were not seen as they were seen in the Geneva Bible. Actually, the pilgrims who came here to America in the 1600s actually carried with them their Geneva Bibles. And so they were looking for a new home. They had actually made a pact on the Mayflower. I'm going to read this pact that they made in 1620. And it says, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith a voyage to plant the first colony in the northeastern parts of Virginia, we do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid. And so that was in 1620 when they said this. And so as they're looking for a new home, they're trying to establish a nation, where people could govern themselves in truth, live out the New Testament. And so they were finding some success. Early on they had run into some their desire was to Christianize any indigenous people that would be here. They were not doing it violently, taking them captive and forcing them as it happened later on in years. But they were actually trying to be a testimony. And for the most part, they were a great testimony, and they judged themselves accordingly. They didn't have a governance system outside of the Word of God. And so they had, their own way of doing things. They gave a couple of reasons for coming to the New World. One was, first of all, was for the glory of God, and second was for the advancement of the Christian faith. And so United States was built on the mission field, the advancement of the gospel, the Great Commission, going into all the world. And so for that reason, you see over the centuries that America was a godly nation for the most part at the onset, because we were a mission-minded, faith-based nation. Many people went from this nation into the ends of the world to preach the gospel. And so there was a blessing here upon this nation. Not only that, but we also allied ourselves as Christians and a Judeo-Christian ethic and belief system that we aligned ourselves with Israel, which has always been a blessing to us. And so they actually tried in one particular time during their growing stages under the leadership of a man by the name of Bradford, who was governor of Plymouth, I think. They tried socialism, where everybody would partake, bring in their crops, their fruit, their game, and everybody put it in the collective, and then from that everybody could withdraw their own share. But what the problem was is that you had some that were lazy or maybe didn't reap the harvest they wanted, and so people begin to infight. Well, I'm working harder than that person, and they're reaping the same benefits I am. So they tried, that failed at socialism, which, just to note, our current leadership and the left in our nation has been pushing for that. It has never worked. Socialism has never worked. It never will. Okay? And so that was tried and failed on the onset of our nation. And so they began to build our nation on free enterprise. As a matter of fact, trading and selling goods helped them prosper, brought dignity to the local community, local families, and it enlarged their sphere of influence, not only amongst the colonies, but amongst those indigenous folks as they were beginning to learn skills and trade with the indigenous people. And so just a little bit of information as far as our nation. Like I said, they came here with their Geneva Bibles because they were under persecution, because they were standing against the fraudulent Church of England under the leadership of the king, where he was supposed to be the spokesman for God. Wasn't living like it, and so they left there to come here to advance the gospel and to glorify God. And that was their heart's intent. So that's the fact of the matter. That's kind of a nutshell look at the Puritans and how they came here and why they came here. So that's all I got for now. Until next time, keep on keeping on.